Hello, Tennessee, and welcome to tonight's program. You know, the totally misnamed and mischaracterized Civil War is still relevant even today because we live in the aftermath both of the Civil War and Reconstruction, the good and bad of that conflict. Many politicians actually use that conflict as a go-to prop for their agenda. The Marxist left, as well as many cowards supposedly on the right, never miss an opportunity to disparage the Confederacy and would destroy any monument to those who fought for what they saw as their country. For many, if not most, slavery didn't even figure into the equation of that war. But many, and even the North from that generation that fought in the war, acknowledged the bravery and tenacity of the Confederate soldier, despite being outnumbered, starving, and dressed in rags. Robert Lee Hodge is a living historian, well known in Civil War reenacting circles for his devotion to accuracy, and has worked passionately in the preservation community for nearly 3 decades. He does all he can do to emulate and experience to some degree the hardships that these men faced, minus the cannon and bullets. To say the least, he takes being a reenactor to a whole new level. In 1999, Rob came to national prominence upon the publication of Tony Horowitz's Confederates in the Attic. Rob appeared as a major character in the book and also appeared on its cover. He'll be joining us shortly. But first, a Trump update. Well, the art of the deal was in effect again this weekend. Trump made a huge deal with the European Union. We are going to have zero tariff on American products. We're actually for the first time going to have American vehicles allowed to be sold in the European Union. I think that rate will be 15%. They are going to pay 15% on what they send here. They're going to buy $78 billion worth of energy and another $600 billion of investment. Now, I'm not wild about investment, but I guess if in terms of other countries investing, I much prefer American firms to grow here, but that's certainly better than Middle Eastern countries. But he made a really good deal. He did point out, and I'm not sure, I guess this was tied into the energy, he did point out the absurdity of the wind power and the huge windmills that are up in certain places, and especially across Europe, and how totally insufficient they are, and how they're a hazard, an environmental hazard when it comes time to get rid of them. So he did poke a little fun at that, and he said, you know, that's not something that we're going to be doing here. I would assume he means anymore. So good news on the economic front. Now, he's got a couple of memes out. You may have saw the first meme where it showed Obama being arrested in the White House at a meeting with Trump. That was a meme he created. And then the other one that came out, I think yesterday or today, was him and J.D. Vance with cartoon faces chasing Obama in OJ's white Bronco. I hope that doesn't mean that ultimately Obama is going to get away with it all, but I guess we'll have to see. Now to our guest, Robert Lee Hodge, born on Stonewall Jackson's birthday. He has taken a keen interest in America's Civil War since age 4. For over 30 years, he has worked on several history-based films, from dramas like ABC's North and South, TNT's Gettysburg, and Andersonville, many programs on the History Channel, Arts and Entertainment Channel, and the National Geographic Channel. He's done his own Civil War documentaries that have won 5 Telly Awards and a regional Emmy in 2007. He's with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing, and what have you been up to?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I was just up in Middleburg, Virginia, this past weekend, doing a, I guess you would call it, hardcore immersion, authentic picket post portraying the 17th Virginia, which was part of Pickett's division, but not with the division at Gettysburg. And the scenario was they're marching to join up with the division somewhere in the Shenandoah. And the opposing force were Federal cavalry, and there was no action whatsoever. It was just based on the manuals, the picket, doing picket, and you would see these people at a distance, but there was no firing, and it makes it more authentic in a lot of ways that way. But just 2 nights ago, I was wondering how many more years I'm going to be doing this. I'm on picket at 2 a.m. in the fog, and there's a heat lightning storm, which is sensational, beautiful.
Right.
It's real quiet, no modern sounds on a 1775 plantation. During the war, the owner was a colonel of the 7th Virginia Cavalry, Richard Delaney. Pelham stayed there, carved his initial in a pane of glass that's still in the window. I wrote about it in the Washington Post. Jeb Stuart stayed there, Jackson. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Wow.
So it's really a place that is, to call it a B&B would be, people can stay there. To call it a B&B would be an insult. It's just a place. It's called Wellborn, and it's in beautiful horse country. And you drive these roads going there that are unpaved, and the stone walls are there that Jeb Stuart's guys fought behind at the Battle of Upperville in Middleburg in June of '63. Pelham fought behind those same walls in November of '62. So there's layers of Civil War history there, not to mention other time frames. But to be on that land, was great. And to be around all these authentic Confederate and Federal reenactors, friends of mine for the most part, from all over the country, including people from Scotland that came.
Oh, wow.
And we had about 300, maybe, something like that. And it's, not open to the public. It's just our own thing, which might be a downside to it. I think when you're doing these things and you don't include the public at some point, I think maybe that's a mistake. But that's what I did this weekend, and I sweated profusely, and I thought to myself, I don't know if I can do this level of intensity anymore. I've been doing this since 1981. So
wow, so more like over 4 decades rather than 30 years. I think that must have been some old notes that I had. So that's a long time, and yeah, you're not old, but you're beyond the age that most people would even consider doing that.
Yeah, I'm in the unauthentic range at this point. Have been that way for a while, but I remember in first grade there were kids in the schoolroom that would talk about, when I grow up, I'm gonna be a soldier, I'm gonna be an astronaut, I'm gonna be a fireman, a police officer, I'm gonna be president. And I just wanted to be a Civil War soldier. It made the income aspect really complicated, but
Yeah.
but
Well, you could do the starving part pretty easy, I suppose.
I'm sorry.
You could do the starving part pretty easy.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. That would be easy. Trying not having income from it. But that was always the obsession. This visual. Very visually based interest in the Civil War. I use the CW word just because it has less syllables than a lot of the other ones, so I use it for simplicity reasons. Yeah. I spoke to a EDC hall in Alexandria, Virginia, and I used the CW word about 12 times, and they had smiles on their faces, and I didn't understand. And then at the end, they charged me 25 cents for every time I said CW, so I owed them like $3. But I use the word just because it's simple.
Right.
Robert E. Lee actually used the word Civil War in 1857 when he was talking about his fear of the impending conflict.
Right.
So it is. But anyhow, I get war between the states, or the late unpleasantness, or the war of northern aggression. I even saw in the National Archives and documents the War of '61 or the War of Secession, and those are federal documents.
Right.
And I thought. Interesting.
Yeah, War for Southern Independence. I like that one.
Yeah.
And it certainly was not a civil war because the South was not trying to take over the North. They wanted to leave the North. But
great point.
Yeah.
Great point. And that's a very simple thing that's overlooked.
Yeah.
That's overlooked. And one of the things I think about is separatist. And like say since 1980, how many countries were there in 1980? And then look at how many countries there are today. Maybe somewhere between 30 and 40 more countries.
Right.
I don't think any of those were peacefully, easily done.
Right.
But it's a natural human thing.
Yeah.
And then when you think in very simplistic terms, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do your own thing. And I'm being very simple right now.
Right.
But it leads, to make argument for it.
Right. Well, it's
And
80 years after the the Declaration of Independence, which their fathers, Robert E. Lee's father, and
right.
I'm sure others, they seceded from England essentially.
Right. And it was an act of terrorism when you define it by George W. Bush terms. Lexington and Concord is an act of terrorism. Very interesting. But these things aren't simple. And that's one of the things I think about when I talk about the late unpleasantness. You see on Facebook they have a relationship status that it could be considered, it's complicated. I think that way about the war between the states.
Yeah.
And these broad brushstrokes that are done by passionate people that may mean good, but also might have a level of ignorance with their passion.
Yep.
And to vilify dead people
right.
is very hurtful. And, if there was somebody that was, say, mentally handicapped that was being picked on, you would probably step in to do something about that, as I would.
Right.
Think about picking on dead people. That's an easy argument. That's a slam dunk. It's presentism with a little bit of information and a lot of passion, vilifying people. I was just in the Upperville Cemetery going to this Civil War event in Middleburg, Virginia. Upperville, Middleburg, they're near each other. The battles take place in June of all over the time, but June of '63 is the big time. I went to the Confederate Circle in the Ivy Hill Cemetery in Upperville, and every grave has been altered fairly recently.
You mean desecrated?
Yes. And it's not just in the Confederate Circle, it's anywhere where there's an Iron Cross, a CSA Iron Cross. And it was very repugnant, to look at that. And you think, man, I would love to spend time with the people that did that. I would love to spend time with them.
I would too, but maybe not for the same reason.
Well, I would like to get to know them. And it's so cowardly.
Yeah.
And there's so much passion, but not compassion.
Right.
There's so much absolutism and kind of authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and that right and wrong are black and white. They're just clear. And let's use the present values that are vast and different for everybody.
Right.
But let's use that presentism of values to apply to people that you didn't even know.
Right. Right. And, the interesting thing is the generation that fought that war, North and South, to a great degree, they had a reconciliation, late 1800s, early 1900s. And then they had these reunions every year that they would go to.
Yeah, it's very interesting and it wasn't easy. The reconciliation wasn't easy. And you can run into like quotes from various people, like Union veteran Lucius Fairchild, that was very upset about sending the flags back south, the captured battle flags. So you'll find that. And you'll find, the hesitancy of Confederate veterans to want to spend time with Federal veterans. It doesn't just happen overnight. But I think, the outside war cry with Spain in 1898, probably was one of the solidifying factors, when you see, Fitz Lee being involved and Joe Wheeler. There's that sense of reconciliation certainly emerging at that point. And then, certainly solidified, with around the time of World War I or the 50th anniversary.
Right.
The 50th is a very important time. And, when you think about monuments, when monuments are going up, like somebody like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I don't know why they're going after Confederate monuments. I don't know what that has to do with Southern poverty. But when you look at, their hit list, and then this is all Jim Crow, very broad brushstrokes, very, very elementary, very simplistic. When you juxtapose the specifics of times when these monuments to Southern soldiers are going up, juxtapose that when monuments in northern states are going up, you'll find somewhat of a similar time frame.
Right.
And part of that has to do with around the 50th anniversary of the war, these rounded events. The 50th anniversary is a big one. The 75th is a big one. The 100th is a big one. But the 50th time frame, a lot of these things are going up. And people say, oh, they're going up during Jim Crow. Yeah, they are. But let's look at the specifics of every monument. Is that why they're going up? And if that is why, then let's talk about that. If we can document that that's the reason. I haven't seen it. That doesn't mean it isn't there. But I'm just saying that let's look at it this way. And this is legit. These people are dying off. This is around the 50th anniversary of the war. These people are dying off, and the comrades that are still living,
right?
They have an involvement, but it's really the women. The female story is very interesting. The UDC, the mothers that lost their sons, the daughters that lost their dads, the sisters that lost their brothers, wives that lost their husbands.
Right.
Those people are very interesting. Steel magnolias, in a lot of ways, in an economically deprived time,
right,
for them to be able to raise the money, and also in most cases, many cases, especially with the bronze sculptures, to find very good artists, often trained in Europe. Moses Ezekiel, prime example. Jewish Confederate, bought at VMI. I was just at Newmarket yesterday on my way back from my Civil War trip, and I saw the Stonewall Jackson Monument that's been moved from VMI to Newmarket, which is kind of weird. And I didn't realize until yesterday that was sculpted by Moses Ezekiel. But Ezekiel's artwork is great, and he was classically trained. And when they put the monument up in Arlington Cemetery, the Reconciliation Monument that was taken down by the previous administration in December of 23, and they didn't follow procedure doing that. That's a whole other thing we can get into. But to take down Ezekiel's monument there is interesting, because Ezekiel, of all his artwork that he did, he wanted to be buried at that monument because that was the one he was the most proud of. Of all the ones he did one at Johnson's Island. I was just at it on July 4th, at the Confederate prison up there. Beautiful bronze. He wanted to be buried at the base of the monument. And when they removed that monument, there's operating equipment on his grave, heavy operating equipment right on top of his grave. You're talking about the desecration of graves there. Yep. I mean, this is kind of ghoulish stuff.
Absolutely ghoulish, especially you look at that in the case with Forrest and his wife in Memphis.
That's ghoulish too. When I saw the footage of some crazies attempting to dig them up before they actually did dig them up, some independent people doing it, that was really upsetting, and there's something good about it too. It creates definition, and that's a good thing. It creates definition. If somebody's willing to do that, that's pretty repugnant, and I looked at those people with a great deal of disdain. But the whole way the Forrest Monument came down in Memphis is disgusting. The political maneuvers that were done to change the names of the parks. I tried to film the Forest Monument in 2006 when I was there for a preservation event. I stayed, what do they call it, the Peabody?
Yeah.
Is it the Peabody, where the ducks are? We stayed there, and on Sunday after the event, I wanted to go down and film the Forest Monument because I think it's great equestrian. This on a Sunday morning in Memphis. And I'm a rube. I didn't know anything about Memphis. And I go down there with a $3,500 camera and a tripod. And I saw all these people that, I don't know, I'm profiling, but I'm like, I don't want to walk out with my $3,500 camera around these folks because they don't really look like they're not going to bother me.
Right.
And so I didn't feel comfortable filming the monument. And so I reconciled and I went over to Helena, Arkansas, which was another story, but I went over to Pat Claiborne's grave and I filmed that. So as a way to reconcile that day. But I couldn't film Forest Monument because it was so shady.
Yeah.
And so in a way, Memphis is a dump.
It is. He's in a better neighborhood now, for sure. He's definitely in a better neighborhood.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's a sad, unfortunate truth. And I wish that wasn't the case. But when you look at the political hierarchy of Memphis, it's very repugnant in a lot of their behaviors. And, I don't have an interest in going back there.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, we talked about they pretty much paint in broad brushes. And they're like, well, okay, these guys, first off, like I said in the intro, slavery was not the reason for the war, certainly for most of the people in the South. It had a lot to do with secession. But most of these guys, especially the guys that you reenact, the guys who you're trying to bring life in, the guys who you are trying to bring authenticity to, they were not fighting, for the most part, for slaves. Most of them didn't have slaves, and they certainly weren't fighting so that, someday they could own one. And what everybody forgets is, at that time, you had slaves in the North. That you had basically two, as Brian McClanahan says, you have two slave-holding republics fighting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you think about. There's a federal general that was killed at Perryville. I think it's Jackson, and he's out of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and he's a slave owner. So, again, it's complicated. When you start thinking about, why did the Confederacy fight, or broad questions like that, anytime you're looking at a group that people are involved in, it's not a monolith.
Right.
And, the Confederate, why did the Confederate soldier fight? Well, it depends on which one you're talking about.
Let's talk about the average guy who was probably not a slaveholder, and they just set him aside.
Well, and that's I think one of the stats was 8%. Now, some of those guys that don't own slaves are going to inherit slaves, so the percentage is probably going to be bigger. But it's rare, and I've read a lot of Reb letters and federal, but I've read a lot of Confederate accounts since I started really digging into stuff in the 90s when I worked at Time Life and dug into the National Archives a lot. You just don't find the discussion of slavery. And a lot of times these are personal letters, between, loved ones. You don't find a lot of discussion about slavery. One of the uncle so-and-so or aunt blah, blah, blah. And then you realize, digging into it, who is this person? Well, he didn't have an uncle so-and-so. What he's talking about is a slave, actually, that he's wondering about how they're doing.
Wow.
I thought that was very interesting. Reuben Von Kidd, officer in the 4th Alabama, who is infantry, who's killed at Chickamauga, he had a servant with him, and the servant buried him on the battlefield, and then he went home to Alabama and talked to the father and said, I know where he is. If you know, if you want to go back and get him to bring him back home, we can do that. And that was done. I thought that was very interesting. Like when you look at something like slavery, it's not one thing. There's millions of slaves. And when you start looking into Confederate business records, you'll find slaves getting paid for various things. It's cleaning privies and stuff like that. All kinds of weird labor work that it's very complicated. And looking at slavery is a fascinating thing, but there's so much passion around it that it's really hard to get to the crux of slavery. Right. But you can say that about things like post-war as well. Looking at something as complicated and as sensitive as the Klan.
Right.
That's talk about a lightning rod. But, looking at, like, I guess you'd say the typology of the Klan, maybe there's 3 typologies. The first one, 67 to 70, the second one somewhere around 1911 to just before World War II, where it's very Midwestern.
Right. Yep.
And in all the Midwestern era, I never see any footage or any photos of people that belonged to the Klan ever flying a Confederate flag. The only time I've ever seen that is in the Coen Brothers movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, where they show it, in the movie.
Right.
I've never seen it historically ever done. And then in the third typology, which is, anti-forced desegregation, the rise of the Dixiecrats, right. You find the flag being flown, but you have to wonder, okay, why is it being flown? Let's try to dissect this. Why is it being flown? And part of it, I think, has to do with the 100th anniversary of the Civil War, War Between the States coming up, and the Dixiecrats have took up the flag. Segregationists took up the flag, and what is that? Rebellion against the federal government, which has a tradition in the South, which I understand. And then when you look at some of the Warsaw Pact countries, when they seceded, if you want to use that word, from the Soviet Union,
right,
in Hungary and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they're flying the Confederate flag, the Confederate battle flag. Yeah. So does that have anything to do with slavery at that point?
No. Yeah. And that's the other thing too. There was just a huge difference of opinion prior to the Civil War, and we've always had it from our founding. You had, I'll call them the nationalists / the federalists versus the anti-federalists and the states' rights. And no states' right was not just about slavery. It was about the role and function and extent of authority of the federal government. And that's still a argument. That's still an issue. And oh, by the way,
absolutely,
we've had 160 years of federal control. How's that working out for you?
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing to talk about, because, when you talk about why is the war between the states such a big deal? There's a lot of reasons why you could say it's a big deal. But one of them is, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, for better or for worse, centralized government became more powerful.
Yep.
And in some instances, I'm sure that was good. In some instances,
it's a problem.
I'm sure that's bad.
Yep. And
you look at Lord Acton, the guy who said all power corrupts, absolute power tends to corrupt, right. Absolute, words of that effect. Yeah. He wrote Robert Lee in 1866, and they were corresponding, and Acton said, the loss of the Southern Confederacy at Appomattox negated the victory at Waterloo for democracy. For democracy. Very interesting.
Right.
And also H.L. Mencken talking about the Gettysburg Address. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because he about Confederates, being the ones fighting for individual liberty.
Right.
And I've always been proud that the United States is the United States. But that becomes more in question at times.
Right.
especially in more recent times, when you have strong federal authority and expenditure of borrowed treasure
Yep.
to very odd things. And so it, makes you wonder who's who. And I have more sympathy, I think, for the Southern Confederacy and the Southern women, and specifically the Southern soldiers, more so now, I would say, than ever, because of these things being so heavily under attack. These people, their graves,
Yeah.
their graves being desecrated. How pathetic.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night. How pathetic. And so I feel like I have always gone often by the name Rob Hodge or Robert Hodge, or even when I was younger, Robbie Hodge. But now I go by Robert Lee Hodge. And part of that is because these things are under attack. And I feel somewhat compelled to politely and hopefully cerebrally attempt to argue for them.
Right.
I hate the vilification of these people. And in my whole history of being interested in Confederate memory, I never meant any harm to anybody. And now, sometimes Confederate reenactors, one guy got pepper sprayed at a parade. This is probably around the George Floyd time. They were doing a parade in, I think, North Carolina, and somebody ran out from the crowd and pepper sprayed this guy. And I thought, wow, that's really rough.
Yeah.
Unless you personally know the person, you have some. It was just very strange, and it's almost like some of the people, and this can go for the right as well, but I think it's actually more attractive to the left.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're living in their own drama, and that they're the principal actor in their own drama.
And they're directing it.
And they're directing it, and they're grooming their image, their self-image. And then, then to be able to broadcast that out through social media, look what I did. I destroyed this Confederate monument, or I pepper sprayed this Confederate reenactor, or I threatened a pipe bomb at Gettysburg, which was done in 2017. That was the last time I was in Gettysburg, was 2017. I did the Remembrance Day parade, and there were calls to, I don't know if it was FBI, but there were calls that there was going to be a bomb planted. And so they took the threat seriously, and they put up cement block barriers, and they had SWAT teams out. They had snipers on roofs in Gettysburg.
Wow, that's pathetic.
And they had SWAT teams with German Shepherds walking around, so you felt like you were in a, Stalag 13 or something. And that kind of behavior, and then for politicians that might be on that side of things to some degree, they'll look the other way and not say that's disgusting or repugnant.
Yeah, they'll even encourage it, or they'll condone it, or they'll say, well, it's understandable, something along those lines.
Yeah. It's very slimy stuff, and you can call, there's like the top 10 leftists I can think of that would be encouraging those types of things, and they're really disgusting. Yeah. There's so much to talk about under that.
I want to get to some questions here. So you are, as I said, a hardcore reenactor. I think you would agree, although you were reconsidering that this weekend, obviously. But
yeah,
why is it important to you to be a hardcore reenactor rather than just a guy that shows up on the weekend, puts on the uniform, and you got your rifle? Which, by the way, somebody wanted to know what type of rifle you carried in these reenactments. So why are you hardcore rather than what is called in the book, if I remember right, a farb? I think that's the correct term.
Yeah. Well, Farb comes from a guy named Jerry Rolfe, who was of the hardcore bend in the 1950s and 60s, and he was had a German background, German studies, German linguist, and I believe Farb is color or Farben, and he thought of the unauthentics as colorful people. And so that's where the etymology, I guess, of the word comes from. But history's always been important to me about a visual truth. Like when you read about, and I'll talk about the Gray. When you read about Lee's armies moving, into Maryland, what's that look like? We don't have film footage of it. What's it look like? Scarecrow, barefoot, classic Confederama, really, really, truly destitute.
Now, what time frame was this? This was going
under September 62, August 62, September 62, marching from what would be the Second Manassas campaign, evolving into the Maryland campaign.
That's early. That's early. I thought the real hardship came later in the war. I didn't realize it was that early.
Not so much clothing wise. Yeah, it's one of the interesting things in doing some of the study. Despite the blockade, English imports were very helpful. The clothing aspect and probably the shot aspect of Lee's army in 65 is very much better than his army in 62. His army in 62 has all kinds of logistical issues. The blockades issue, but domestic production and getting things to the troops, meeting some sort of standards is difficult. And this is where the home front aspect really comes in. The societies in the families sewing quilts and making socks. That really kicks in 62 due to a Confederate embedded journalist with basically with Hood's troops. His name's Peter Wellington Alexander, and he's a cross between Geraldo Rivera and Thomas Paine. He's embedded, but he's not fair and balanced at all. He's partisan, and he's partisan Confederate. He writes of the Scarecrow Army, Lee's army, that they are going to have problems in the coming months when the winter comes. And there's got to be a massive crusade put together so these guys don't freeze to death. And that comes about. It's very interesting to see the home front aspect. And that ties in with the legitimacy of the Southern Romanticism. I know that can go too far at times, but you see the home front aspect, and you see it in the federal side as well. But the Confederate side is very interesting because they're in much more desperate shape.
Right.
But very much a Scarecrow army. Lee has about 37,000 troops at Sharpsburg, and they are destitute. To answer the person's question about what kind of weapon, I have three weapons. I have 69 caliber Springfield reproduction smoothbore, and I have a British Enfield reproduction. It has some original parts on it. I've done a lot of work on it. It fools a lot of people that they think it's original, but it's not. And then I have an original Austrian Lorenz, a 54 caliber, and I shoot that live. That has really good rifling in it. I shoot that live at targets at the NSSA, the North-South Skirmish Association, which I belong to. And if you ever want to hear incredible audio of the Civil War, you should go to NSSA, because you're never going to hear a couple hundred muskets shooting live rounds anywhere else, I don't think.
Cool. And from from the text line, kudos on the flags behind you in your room there.
No, thank you.
So now, I'm not saying that it wasn't hard for the Union troops, because it was a hard situation. But I mean, the South definitely had a hard. They were nowhere near as well supplied, whether you're talking food, clothing, ammunition. So it was a struggle from early on. And then, of course, maybe what you're talking about for the home front effort in the South, is that what the Union, what Lincoln and Sherman and Grant used to justify their war on civilians? Any idea?
Well, obviously Sherman knew the South from being in Louisiana at that military academy, and he liked the South. He understood the South, and I think to break the back, you're going to have to wage war and do a lot of burning. Sheridan does it, in the Valley, the so-called civil aspect. McClellan and Buell and others early on were respecting property, and they would put guards on slaveholding property. I mean, tons of accounts of it. And Buell was married to a Alabama slaveholding family. But there, depends on the generals and what time of the war you're talking about. All these things are organic; they change. Obviously 1862 is different than 1864. You got an election year in 64, and it seems to be a full court press.
Yeah.
The war machine, synchronicity. Sherman moves out of his area by Chattanooga, I think on the same day as Grant moves out of Culpeper, those encampments, to fight the wilderness and start moving on the overland campaign. And, you look at the string of generals Lincoln had to deal with. It's a much more serious war in 64, and there's a level of determination. And, when you think of, there's one guy in particular, he's in the 5th Alabama Battalion, his Archers Brigade, Tennessee Brigade for the most part. He enlists in 61, and he dies at Appomattox on April 9th, before the surrender. He had been through the whole thing. And imagine talking to that guy, what he had been through. It's just a really painful thing when you think about it. And, going back to the reconciliation aspect, to think that we're as united as we really are in so many ways, it's really amazing, actually, when you think about the history. And, you think about the World War II veterans. My dad, was a combat veteran of the 1st Cav Division in the Philippines.
Wow.
And he had some great Yankee friends. As he went to a Catholic mass, his friend from Boston named Steele, he was good friends with, and he went to a Catholic mass with Steele, and then Steele went to a Protestant service with my dad, and then they landed at the Los Negros on the Admiralty Islands. And that, was kind of, to me, in a more personal way, a sense of reconciliation. But my father said, he said, Bob, he goes, some of them Yankees I liked, but I didn't want to be around them in battle. And I'm like, why is that? And he goes, well, they didn't know how to hunt.
Well, you probably know this. The NRA was formed, National Rifle Association was formed after the war in the North initially, because the veterans realized, those Confederates, the Southerners, could shoot so much better than our guys.
I didn't realize this.
Yeah, that's at least that's the story that I've heard, and I think it's believable. I want to go back a little bit to motivation as far as the North, and it varies. I understand it's not the same for everybody. Never has been in any war. What do you think? Like I said, I think the average Southern Confederate soldier was probably not fighting, for slavery in any way, shape, or form. Right. And I don't think that most of Union soldiers, in fact, I know they weren't.
Right.
They were not fighting to end slavery. Right. And in fact, there was a lot of them after the Emancipation Proclamation. They're like, hey, wait a minute. I'm all about keeping the Union together. Right. But this ending slavery thing, I didn't sign up for that.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. And, you can look at mutinies that happen in the Federal Army, which are fascinating to look at. Irish Brigade mutinies. Over the Emancipation Proclamation, and I believe 109th Illinois mutinies. They had 1 Republican company and 9 Democrat companies in their regiment. The 9 Democrat companies took off and went into the woods, but they were forced back in at gunpoint.
Eastern Kentucky had, they had a lot of, they did have Union soldiers in Eastern Kentucky, and I can't remember the unit, but a group of a unit of black soldiers showed up, and there was just about a riot between those two, between the Union white troops and the Union black troops, because they had no use for like, nope, we're not having it.
Right, exactly. And race is a very interesting thing to look at. In Battle of Nashville, USCT's, United States Colored Troops, fight against Granbury's Texans at Nashville, and it's pretty severe. The Confederates wallop them, and there's a lot of heavy things that are said about what transpired. And you'll find kind of a sense of the emancipation and putting federal troops or black people in federal uniforms was stepping over boundaries that's going to lead to more intensity and violence. And it's interesting because I would say, in reading the accounts that I have, there's more overt bigotry towards people of African descent from the northern side than the southern side. And I think part of that has to do with assimilation, in the sense of Southerners had been around people of African descent for several centuries.
Right.
And in the North, it's more of a new thing in some areas, in many areas. So when, some of the most bigoted accounts I've seen directed towards people from descendants of Africa would be soldiers from the 13th New Hampshire, where I'm not going to repeat what he said when he saw black people at Fredericksburg, but Charles Wainwright, he was an artillery officer, wrote a book called Diary of Battle. I won't repeat the stuff that he said, but I found that when I was working at Time Life Books. And so very, very heavy things. But, you'll find on the Confederate side too, but it's, and in both cases, it's newsworthy. But the bigotry, I would say, overt bigotry is written overt bigotry that I've found is more on the federal side. But anyhow, I mean, there's some heavy things that are said. Alexander Hunter said he relished getting to Baltimore to shoot Yankees and blacks, but he didn't say blacks.
Right, right.
He relished it. And he's my favorite Reb, so that's just, a challenge to reconcile with. But I also lived next to the projects in Nashville for 7 years, so I can relate to Alexander Hunter. I got shot at there.
Well, you picked a strange place to live for a white guy from Ohio, huh?
I tried to be part of the gentrification, but I got bullets in my house. I got a great experiential education, though. I mean, I feel very well fortified to talk about the subject, to be honest with you. But, I found an account of a Confederate soldier, May 25th, 1862, part of Stonewall Jackson's troops that had flanked Nathaniel Banks out of Winchester, Virginia. And he said, I saw a white lady walking down the street today, praising us that she was free again, and that blacks were blacks again. But he didn't say blacks.
Right.
And so that's an interesting account, and I don't mind publishing it.
Right.
But he also said they captured 500 pounds of opium, and that they captured 1,200 Hessians.
Oh,
which
wow.
is, oh yeah, the word Hessian I've been finding more and more in various Confederate writings talking about federal soldiers, Hessians.
Wow.
And yeah.
Are those the 48ers?
You're really onto a good point. I think this is tied in with the 48ers, although I don't know what loyalties many of these people have. I would imagine most of them are the part of the social revolutionary elements from the German revolutions.
Right.
And certainly the officer aspect is Franz Siegel, Schimmelpfennig, Karl Schurz being the biggest one. And that's one of the actually more interesting aspects I've been fascinated with now, looking into federal things when I do, is the communication that many of these German 48ers that are now federal officers had with Engels and Marx.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you find more of it. You find it more and more if you look.
Yep. Yep.
And so the 48er thing is very interesting. And it ties in with Marx and the who's a fascinating character. And Engels too, who was a fox hunting Marxist. I always thought Engels was interesting, a fox hunting Marxist.
Now you played the role of Nathan Bedford Forrest. I mean, he's probably one of the most misunderstood, mischaracterized, vilified members of the from the Confederacy. And I think they don't. We talked earlier about they removed the statue from. He was in our Capitol, and our utterly worthless oxygen thief of a governor allowed that to happen. He allowed what happened in Memphis to happen. He allowed the statue to be removed. He encouraged it. Now, he did it underhandedly, but he did that. He allowed that, and I think that's disgraceful.
Right.
Everybody from Tennessee should be taught about Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Yeah.
And they have nothing to be ashamed of. And in fact, if you want to look at reconciliation, that's a good guy right there to look at.
It is. Again, it goes, a lot of the people that hate his guts don't know much about him. And I don't know enough about him. I think he's a fascinating character in many ways. But his civil rights aspect is a curveball that you throw out, when you talk about how he supported black people pre, during, and post Civil War. And especially the post-Civil War aspect is interesting because it makes it complicated. It's not easy. It's not simple, but people want to make it simple. They want to profile.
Yeah.
They want to generalize. They want to stereotype. And it is not, it's really foolish to do that.
Yeah. Stereotype for thee, but not for me. Something along those lines. It's okay to stereotype depending on who you're stereotyping. Now, I've got to kind of round this out a little bit because we've talked about you being a hardcore reenactor. So what does a hardcore reenactor, how are you different? And I think I asked this a minute ago and we kind of got sidetracked. How are you different than just your average reenactor? Not to take anything away from them. I think it'd be cool to do it. I've never done it. I am in the SCV. But just tell, how deep do you get into it, especially experiencing as much as you can minus getting shot at? Now, you've been shot at, but that was in the project, so that doesn't count.
Right.
What's the difference? And what do you do? What do you endure? How do you get ready for that?
Well, there's a lot of elements to it. Historically, reenactors age. And so how are you going to deal with that? Well, I'm almost 59 and I'm well into the unauthentic age range.
Right.
And I still like doing this stuff. I still like putting the clothes on. I still like being in that escapism, the camaraderie around the campfire. So how do I, one of the things is really be thoughtful about what you eat. And don't be a fat body. Get out and move around. And that's one thing that I do. I can't go to a gym because gyms are boring. So I work in my yard a lot and just figure out ways to maintain a reasonable waist.
What's a reasonable waist for a Confederate soldier in the 1860s?
Negative something. I don't know. I mean, ideally, I guess I'd say about 28, 29 inches, but, or maybe even slender. I mean, you look at some of the original uniforms, and I was looking at some yesterday in Virginia.
Right.
They're so tiny.
Yeah.
So tiny. So, but I use Chinese hair care products to create an illusion that some of my hair is not white, and I try to maintain some reasonable physical fitness. Although, like I said, this weekend my cardio wasn't too good. It was pretty incredibly hot.
Well,
But
I want to stop you right there because I want to say this. I've read accounts of different battles, middle of summer, okay, and they're wearing these heavy uniforms. Maybe they're low on water. They've marched all night, or they've marched the last hour before they get to line up. I mean, a lot of people died from heat exhaustion.
uh, yeah, and I read account. I wrote some stuff on Law's Brigade and the Gettysburg campaign followed their route in detail. Um, and they talk about guys dropping, some of them never to see Earth again. And this weekend, I was feeling that.
I bet.
And I've done this since 1981, and I had new miserable experiences. And then I thought to myself, am I legally insane? Why am I doing this to myself? I mean, it's not, you start self-evaluating. It's like, we did this live Confederate artillery battalion shoot. We had like over 12 guns, shooting live at targets in North Georgia. Super authentic. Sleeping out in Sibley tents and A-frames, really authentic. All horse-drawn, really authentic. Crazy. We were shooting live. Boy, was it cold that Friday night, and I tried to sleep. Well, that was my mistake, trying to sleep. I've done this stuff long enough. You don't try to sleep in cold weather. You stay up and just throw wood on the fire and try to stay warm. Staying warm is more important than getting sleep, because you can't get the sleep in the cold. At least I can't.
Right.
And so, that Friday night I started self-evaluating, and I'm like, what am I doing? I've been doing this since 1981, and I froze my tail off more than a few times. I mean, really miserable experiences. I can go right back to them now. 1987 Shiloh, 18 degrees. It was horrible. But, you wonder, like, how many times am I going to do this until I learn? But there's something Buddhist or cathartic about it, communing in some sort of suffering in a way. I'm not getting shot at, but I'm enduring the elements. But talking about authenticity or trying to be authentic, none of us are authentic. We try to be.
Right.
But in what is authentic? I mean, that's a great philosophical discussion. And that also means, is first person part of the role of that, acting as a person. That can get weird. Bad reenacting theater.
So let me get a little in terms of authenticity and what the average soldier, let's say it's pick a battle and you know them better than I do. What would a Confederate soldier experience? What did they experience, let's say 3 days or 4 days or maybe even a week prior to a battle? They're moving to that battle. Summer, winter, what's it like?
Well, I guess reading about the Sharpsburg campaign most recently, and reading about Law's Brigade on the way to Gettysburg, thinking about those marches. There's a great deal of, reading about the Confederates and the Sharpsburg campaign, you're really, and I said this before, I believe, you're really talking a scarecrow army. You're really talking, eventually when they get into Maryland, there'll be a lot of troops that do not have shoes. Now you start wondering about shoes, like how long does it take for them to wear out? On hard marching, I think a pair of shoes could wear out in 2 weeks.
So what's hard marching? 10, 12 miles?
No. I'd say, doing, 20 miles a day or maybe even more. I mean, Stonewall Jackson's guys in the Valley did, I think, on certain days between 24 and 27.
Wow. Back to back.
I don't know. I don't know about back to back. I don't know about back to back.
Right.
But
What have you done marching?
I am assuming back to back, and I could probably get you an answer on this fairly quick. But when you're talking about the routes that Jackson took to do his mysterious maneuvers, to pop up in one spot and disappear, and pop up in another spot and defeat 3 federal armies, I would say that many of those days are back to back.
Right.
I would think the way he seesawed up and down the valley.
And so you've done that. You've done those kind of marches.
Well, the most I ever did in one day was 17. And that was at Chancellorsville on the anniversary of Jackson's flank march route, May 2nd. And he marched on Saturday, May 2nd, and I marched on a Saturday, May 2nd as well. So I was really in the glide path. And it was strenuous, but that was a preservation march. And I had 200 other Confederates, and we raised $37,000 for the Chancellorsville battlefield that day to give to the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust to save the land. So it was really grassroots empowerment and hard marching.
Okay, what about diet? The Confederate soldier, it's not like he got 3 squares a day by any means.
No, there's going to be some level of foraging and so forth. I think one of the staples is somewhat of a no-brainer, but it's going to be, hardtack and sow belly or something of that effect. Corn pone. Sometimes you get peas. Sometimes you get beans. And sometimes it's more elaborate. I mean, I remember talking about reading about a Confederate in 1861 at Post Manassas, but camped there in 61, and they're eating salad. And I thought that was interesting. I'm like, what was in your salad? What is it carrots? Is it, beets, or, what do you have? But, the diets are interesting. It's one of the most miserable. There's so many miserable elements, really.
So when you go out and do this, I mean, you're doing those things. You're marching. You're not eating. It's not like, okay, it's lunchtime, we're going to go get something at McDonald's. I mean, you're out there the whole time, and you're basically what we call embracing the suck, and, and you're doing that for days on end?
No, it's the only time it's been days on end is when I did a march in Red River, Louisiana, that area. We did 56 miles over probably about 5 days. And that was a heavy duty march, and the food got a little rough after a while. We didn't have any porta-johns. We dug sinks, we dug poop trenches, and then covered them up after we were ready to move out. And we had permission to be across this big plot of land. It was owned by a timber company, and they had clear cut a bunch of it, so it was very interesting to go through. But that was the only extended thing I ever really did where it was like that. And to be honest with you, I couldn't do it very long. It wouldn't take long to break down. When I worked on the Gettysburg movie, I lived out on a bale of hay the first week, and after then I got a tent with another fellow brought a tent. I had the luxury of being under canvas, and I would say 3 weeks into it, I was breaking down physically.
Oh, wow.
Getting respiratory, and I didn't smoke cigarettes or anything. I was getting respiratory issues. I developed ringworm. I didn't know what ringworm was. I had to put zinc on it to get rid of it. But I was breaking down, and that also happened when I worked on the movie North and South. That was in November of '85. I lived in a tent 2 weeks there, and I got there. I was a skeleton. I was 6'1", 135 pounds, and I lost 10 pounds. I lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks there.
Good Lord. Now, you were a scarecrow for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I didn't know about fire ants until I got down to work on North and South. That was down in Natchez, Mississippi. And they would wake you up.
I bet.
And I didn't realize this till later, that fire ants are Farby. fire ants didn't come into the United States until 1914 in Biloxi.
Apparently, they didn't get the message, right?
They didn't get the message. No, same thing with kudzu. That's not traditional South either.
No, it's not. Now, you've produced some films yourself. Can you talk about those? And if somebody wanted to see them, how would they go about that?
Well, I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm not much of a technical person as I am a creator. And I've liked the stuff that I've created. And I have the stuff still on DVD. I don't web stream it. And if you want to get it, you usually can get it through my website, but I'm revamping my website, so I have it down right now. So if you want to get it, you can just email me, Robert Lee Hodge at Yahoo, for now is the email address. And you can get my Emmy Award-winning film on Franklin. And I also have a film that was commissioned by the state of Kentucky on the Battle of Perryville, largest battle in Kentucky, and a cut-down version of that plays at the State Historic Site in Perryville, which I'm very proud of. That was really, that and Franklin were two of my babies that I really worked on hard. That was 6 hours a day, or 6 days a week, 18-hour days.
Wow.
For about 4.5 months in post-production. So I would forget to eat, and I'd forget to sleep, and I developed canker sores, and I didn't understand. And then I had to read up on canker sores, and and it said it could be caused from stress, and that's what was happening when I was working on these things, because you were trying to meet a deadline.
Right.
It was brutal, but they're things I'm very proud of. I also did a film commissioned by the state, or by the county of Spotsylvania County, on the Battle of Spotsylvania. And I own those 3 films, Spotsylvania, Franklin, and Perryville. And then I did 2 other films that I don't own. When I split from my business partner, they own Franklin and Chickamauga, which I'm very proud of, but I don't own those. I think about getting back into film, but I talk about it. We'll see. I have a bunch of film footage I own, and I should do something with it. But, you know, I kind of got burned out by the industry, and I'm not really, quite candidly, not a businessman as much as I am a creator. And I think I'm good at it. I have a history of being good at it. I can say somewhat proudly, but there's a lot more to do. My whole background has historically been art and history.
Right.
And so the melding of doing film has always been something I wanted to do. From working on North and South for 2 weeks, I left college as a freshman at Kent State to go down to Mississippi to live in a tent for 2 weeks to meet Patrick Swayze and hang out there.
What was that like?
I'm sorry?
What was that like?
Oh, it was great, man. It was a great experience. I mean, Swayze himself was standoffish. He was disgruntled with the production people, because I don't think they were going to flip the dime to fly his wife or his girlfriend in. And I heard that was why he was kind of standoffish. But there was a lot of nice people there, like Parker Stevenson from the Hardy Boys. He played a Berdan sharpshooter officer. He's a very nice guy. And Kirstie Alley was nice. And James Reed, the guy that played, I think it's James Reed, the guy that played the federal overall character. The first day we filmed, we had 3,500 reenactors.
Wow.
And we were portraying a scene of surrender, basically, on the Lynchburg Road. 1,500 Confederates come across a field and find 2,000 Federals. And they freeze, and then a lone Confederate rider comes out under a flag of truce, and the Rebs surrender. And when we filmed that, it was the first day of filming in Natchez, Mississippi, and it was really neat to see 3,500 reenactors on this big field, blue facing gray. And do you remember the Miller Lite commercials where they'd say less filling?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So those were real big at the time. And the director, Kevin Connor, yells cut after the scene where we face each other, and then the lone rider comes out. and he yells, "Cut." And this one guy on our side says, "Less filling," yells it. And another guy on the federal side yells, "Tastes great." And then it's 20 guys and 20 guys, and then 100 guys, and it's like thousands saying it back and forth. I'm like, what a great commercial.
I'm surprised they didn't use that.
It would have been, and my understanding was the cameras kept rolling, but I don't know if that's true. But I thought it would make a great commercial. But to do the films, to work on Gettysburg and have a part in Gettysburg, that was a great experience. I wrote 41 pages on it called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, about the making of Gettysburg, my experience on it. And I had a part in it, Robert Tyler Jones, just a little cameo spot, no spoken words. But I got stabbed by an original sword. Richard Jordan, who played Armistead, his sword stabbed me in my hand, and I had to go to the hospital and get stitches. And I go to the hospital in my Confederate uniform with this makeup on and fake blood on me as well as real blood on my hand.
Right.
Stitches, and I go in, and there's 150 reenactors from the filming who had real casualties, like, twisted ankles, black eyes, gunpowder burn, stuff like that. And they're laid out in this lobby, because there's a bunch of them, and they're all waiting to get dressed on, and there's different doctors going around. I felt like I was on MASH or something. And then I thought more specifically, no, this is like a different version of the hospital scene in Gone with the Wind at the railroad station. Really neat. But yeah, I got stabbed by an original sword. It was an original 1850 foot officer sword that Richard Jordan was carrying.
Well, if you had to get stabbed, at least it was with an authentic weapon. So that's
exactly.
Good. So battlefield preservation is something you are very passionate about. And let's talk a little more about that and some of the more endangered ones and what people can do to help.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Battlefield preservation's been a big part of my life since June of 1991, when I first went to the Wilderness Battlefield to see it finally. Growing up in Ohio, I had heard about the battlefield and read about it in these maps from this guy named David Greenspan from the Golden Book of the Civil War. A lot of people would be familiar with these maps, but they're like Lilliputian-sized soldiers, and smoke and hills and stuff. And so you see the roads like Brock Road or Orange Plank Road or Orange Turnpike. And I'm hearing these names and reading and seeing these maps and learning these places as a kid in Ohio. When I finally go there in 1991, I'm standing right next to the Confederate trenches on the Hill Ewell Drive at the Wilderness, trying to soak it up. You're there, and I'm expecting, the wind to be blowing, the birds chirping, and that I'm going to transcend time and connect with the gray ghosts that haunt my mind and get into it. But I hear circular saws and hammers putting up homes just, in some cases, 100 feet away from the trenches.
Wow.
I couldn't process that. I didn't understand that. I had been to Gettysburg, I had been to Antietam, been to Shiloh, been to Chickamauga. I thought in my untrained eye they were pretty good shape. I assume more of the battlefields were in pretty good shape. Adults would do a better job. And I felt like I got hit by Mike Tyson. I was numb, but I wasn't angry yet. That took about a week because I had to process it. And I was so stunned by it. But then I started calling the Park Service, what can I do? What can I do? And I was calling different numbers and getting shuffled around to different people. And I finally got a hold of a lady named Kathleen Madigan, who was kind of an executive assistant, I guess, or something, to the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission. They had just been started by Congress to report to Congress in 2 years on the status of the battlefields. And the reason this commission came about was there was a developer extortionist named Till Hazel who wanted to develop part of the 2nd Manassas battlefield, which is also part of 1st Manassas, but mostly 2nd Manassas, key stuff. And 500 acres, he wanted to put in all kinds of stuff there. And he got Eddie DeBartolo, the mall developer and San Francisco 49er owner, who's got questionable ties to organizations. Um, and he was going to develop the area for it. And it was just really insane. Well, there was a big uproar, thank God, and a lot of grassroots, like, this can't stand. So Reagan signed a rider bill to pay this guy to save the 500 acres at Manassas. So you think it's a preservation victory, right? But if you think about the money that that the government paid, in 1989 dollars, it was 136 million bucks for 500 acres.
Good Lord. Only the government would do that.
Right. So, am I glad it's saved? Yeah. But that's not a way to continue saving land, because you're going to run out of cash. So, anyhow, the commission was started basically because of that and other things. But, we can't be paying $136 million for 500 acres, from an extortionist. So, right. They created a matrix and prioritized and philosophized about, what was most important and why. And Ed Barse was involved, and David Lowe from the Park Service. Ken Burns was on the board, but he didn't go to any of the meetings. Jim McPherson was on the board. I always thought he was a boring guy, kind of a stiff guy. And other people that were very nice that, are long gone now. But so that's where I got my education about, in some ways how this stuff works. And it's really, honestly, the local government has a lot more power over this stuff than we realize. The federal government has done eminent domain, which I'm not a fan of. They did it at the Smokies. They've done it on
Land
the
Between the Lakes. They've done it here.
Land Between the Lakes, Skyline Drive.
Yep.
And there's even photos of federal agents pulling Appalachian grandmothers out of their log cabins with their slat bonnets on, like they're from the 19th century, and this is like 1930s, and there's the guys in trench coats and the fedoras like pulling them out. And that's not a good memory to have if you're pro park, right. And I'm pro green space, and I'm a tree hugger in a way because I love the Confederate battle flag.
Right.
I wanted to save the land where the giants in gray and blue fought. Right. And in some cases, that was their last scenes of Earth. And then when you see it as a Walmart parking lot or an Exxon or something like that, it's like, this isn't right, but then it becomes, well, how much of this do you protect, and when I was younger, I was more of a zealot, that I knew what right was, and I would pound my fist at board of supervisors meetings and would say, don't you understand, like Nikita Khrushchev with his on the, and the thing is that it wasn't fair. It was my immaturity. It wasn't fair to me to be that way, because I knew I was right. And that's dangerous when you know that you're right. I know I'm right. Not everybody has had the same experience of the world as I've had. We all have different experiences. And so it's very challenging to talk to people about something you're concerned about when they have no concern whatsoever. Right. And so how do you communicate with them? And I think a more genteel, thoughtful manner, respectful manner. And I would just be, I think, more cocky, like a lot of activist types can be. And I think that, not that I wasn't true to myself, I know I was, but I think part of it also fulfilled like a checkbox. Like, look, it made me feel good too. Like there's the philosophical question, does the young man help the old woman across the street with her groceries because it's the right thing to do, or is it because it makes him feel good?
Yeah.
It's both. It's both. It's both. And so part of that was fulfilling my self-worth as to, look what I'm doing. But I genuinely, and still do, really believe in it. It's just that I think that the activist types, which I have been and still am to some degree, I think you need to be smarter about talking with people.
What about the Arlington Memorial?
Oh, well, that's as much as I'm into green space preservation, and I still will be, I'm on the board of the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. We saved 2,000 acres at the Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville area, and I want to give a plug for them before we're done. But the monument thing, I didn't see coming. I didn't see what the right-wing talk show hosts had been saying in the 90s. I was mildly left of center. I like the Confederate battle flag historically, but I was mildly left of center. My parents were FDR Democrats. And I remember people like Rush Limbaugh, who I came around to and wound up liking before he passed. But he was very blustery. And the delivery, I would roll my eyes. And I'd be like, man, I don't want to listen to this. But the thing is that the content of what he said, and others of the same kind of ilk, sadly have come true. And I don't like saying that. I don't relish saying that. But they were the beacons of saying these things. And I still don't like their delivery. I don't like Sean Hannity's delivery. But the content was right. And I wish it wasn't right. But you're seeing it come to fruition when you look at the Arlington Monument, for example, the Reconciliation Monument that the Biden administration took down in 2023, just around Christmas time, by the way.
Yeah.
Good timing. And it's slimy. And I'm sure Biden didn't even know about it,
He was off eating ice cream somewhere.
Well, there is probably auto-pinned. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there was a lot of other elements running the show. As to what those elements were or are is another question. But this is repugnant. The Reconciliation Monument, the brainchild of Union veteran and President William McKinley, and then basically challenged the UDC and others to raise the money. And they get the Jewish Confederate veteran Moses Ezekiel, who's no slouch, great sculptor, to do this amazing thing. And he loves the monument so much, that's where he wants to be buried. And the group that I'm blessed to know about, led by, I would say, some genuine steel magnolias that I respect and love, Defend Arlington is the group. And they are not defeatists.
Right.
A lot of these causes, you'll have people that kind of, I don't know, they don't have the right mindset. If you're going to go in for the big win, you better go in with the idea of winning. And I really feel that some of these ladies are like that in the group, and I'm very impressed with them.
Defend Arlington?
Defend Arlington. Just so you can look them up on Facebook, just type in Defend Arlington into Google. But the two things that Defend Arlington needs, and this is also with preservation of battlefields in general, they need money and they need advocacy. Why they need money? They got to pay for legal bills. And I've raised several $1,000s for them. I wish it was more. But and what's amazing about Defend Arlington is they've paid down their debt amazingly well, and the debt has been in the hundreds of thousands to pay to fight against the Army, Lloyd Austin. And although things have changed, we're still trying to get to Pete Hegseth. We're still trying to get to various people. J.D. Vance has brought up monuments on some interviews, but the money is one aspect. But the other thing is, and Defend Arlington can help you design, you can read their information as to what to do. Talking to your congressman is important, especially if they're in Virginia. If you're in Virginia, it's a bigger deal because Governor Youngkin's willing to accept the monument. That's not the point. The precedent that this sets, just remember this, 5 years ago, we thought, in this post-George, well, it was even pre-George Floyd, but post-George Floyd, well, they want to move the monuments from the courthouse grounds, but it'll be okay to move it to a cemetery and they'll be safe there. No, that's not the case, because the paradigm shift is much further now. Because now the most famous cemetery in America, the Reconciliation Monument of all things, has been taken down. So that sets precedent for all Confederate monuments in cemeteries to come down. And people need to realize what's transpiring. This isn't going away. This is a chipping away.
Absolutely. This is legalized desecration. And, you know, this is something that Marxists do. They have a history of doing these kind of things.
You bring up a good point. And it's interesting because there's a lady named Xi Van Fleet who is from China, grew up in Mao's Cultural Revolution. And she lives in Loudoun County, Virginia now, and she spoke out against the Loudoun County School Board that was supporting transgender things and hiding a transgender rapist from things. And she spoke out. The school board meetings got very volatile, and she spoke out, and she spoke about not completely the transgender thing, but the symbolism of it.
Right.
This is bigger. This whole thing is bigger than transgenderism or CRT or whatever, or the monument removal. This is all bigger. And she's like the canary in the coal mine saying, this is Mao's Cultural Revolution repackaged, coming to your doorstep. I wouldn't even think what I just said would be something that I would be concerned of or be a part of my mindset 10 years ago.
Right. But now you're seeing it. You're seeing it. And you know, I hope that Hedgepath is more help on this than he's been on the renaming of post installations. You know, I mean, okay, we renamed it after Lee, but it's not Robert E. Lee. We renamed it after Benning, but it's not the right Benning. That's just garbage. And so I hope they're more help than what they've been on the renaming.
Right. No, it's kind of half-hearted. And I guess that's their idea of compromise. But I think it's really, the monument thing in particular is very repugnant. I think Glenn Youngkin needs a spanking for wanting to receive it, because anybody that thinks that that is a solution is full of themselves or just delusional or foolish, because government shifts like the wind. And Glenn Youngkin's only in for a short period of time. And the lieutenant governor, I think, is a false person. What's her name?
Winsome Sears.
Yeah, I think she's a false. If we want to say that some level of republicanism today is leaning, if we want to say libertarianism, conservative, I don't even know how to use these words correctly, but something along those lines. I don't think she's it.
Yeah. Well, those words don't mean a lot anymore.
Right.
And especially once you're talking politicians, you know, I mean, they don't mean a whole lot. I want to do a quick. First off, I want to hear anything else that you have to say about this monument issue, and in terms of Defend Arlene. If you have, I know you mentioned the site. Is there anything upcoming? Do we have do we know when the next hearing will be, or what the next step is?
You know, I got to tell you, I don't know where, as of the last week, I'm not exactly sure where things are, except for the main thing that I came away with, what I could contribute to the group, is echoing the idea of money and of contacting Hegseth, contacting Trump, which I've done. I mean, you know, not like he's trying to read my letter.
You don't have him on speed dial.
Think of this, though. Imagine if just 30 people actually wrote a letter or an email letter on one day, just 30, and that went to the White House. Just 30. That's a blip on the radar, I think. Yeah. And I'm not saying that would be a significant victory, but that's a step in the right direction. But to create noise is very important. And I mean, polite noise, I think. But this is so foundational. You know, one of the hopes is, you know, maybe that this could go to the Supreme Court. But I think really to get Kirk Lyons on to talk with Kirk would probably be the best. He's one of our legal representatives. And
Okay.
also we have a few others, but Kirk's really probably the most important person to talk to as to where things are. Um,
Well, I'd love to
again,
have him on.
well, great. I think he would do it. He'd be glad to do it, I'm sure. To get into the legal nuance, he would be the person. I guess basically keeping up the scare, and that is your congressional people, which I talked to my congressional people. I was really fortunate to be at Franklin, and I gave a talk about this, impromptu talk to about 70 folks at Franklin. And I spoke, and I kind of was afraid I extended myself, but I said I feared it might be cultural Marxism. I didn't say it in a loud tone or pointing fingers or anything, but I said, I worry about this being cultural Marxism. I'm not sure, but. And one of the people that came up to me in the crowd was Congressman Ogles, one of his
Andy
aides.
Ogles, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of his aides. And he came up, and so we've been in touch, and I send him stuff. And Ogles has actually done a few things.
Good.
And I don't know
Good.
if I was the one that spurred him on, but I'm glad he did it.
He's one of the better ones, at least from Tennessee, which that's a fairly low bar, I have to tell you.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, putting up the pressure, that's the thing is that, I know that I don't do enough. I do a little bit, but I know I need to do a lot more. And that's just being candid. We all need to do a lot more. We all need to think about crafting a letter. And then that might be, resending it the next day and resending it, maybe fine tuning it. But there has to be a repetitive thing. You have to be a squeaky wheel. When I look at so many of the people on the far left, and traditionally I was mildly left, they push me away. But the people on the far left seem to be well oiled, and
they're very organized, and this is absolutely cultural Marxism.
Yeah, and sometimes I think of it as a cold civil war, and it's very worrisome to me. And again, this is coming from a person that I voted for Barack Obama. Don't hate me. I voted for Barack Obama in 2008. I haven't voted for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 election just because I like the guy. And you come around after a while. You start looking. I start self-reflecting. Well, why did I vote for these people? Well, I like them.
Once you actually focused on this century, you realized you were making a mistake, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting to think about voters' choice. I think John Kennedy won a lot of people over when he, debated Nixon, and Nixon looked, uncomfortable on screen and sweaty and stuff. And there's that salesmanship,
Yeah.
And I take him, and you can say that about Ronald Reagan. He's got great speeches, but you can criticize all the heroes. But I have affection for Jimmy Carter. I don't think he was the greatest president, but I like Jimmy Carter. He had ancestors in the Sumter Light Artillery.
Oh, okay. Well, hey,
But I start coming around to these things, and it's like, I have to detach myself and look at the issues.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't like somebody, but that doesn't mean I don't vote for them.
Right. Or you got to look at the issues are the most important thing, but a lot of people is, oh, I like them.
Right.
But,
it's very simplistic.
that's a problem. Hey, I want to do something here. I've got somebody put some effort into some lightning round questions. Now, most of these are kind of lighthearted. There's nothing super heavy here, but I kind of like to close it out with this. And so I'm not going to do all of it, but I want to do, if you could time travel back to any one battle, what battle would it be?
Well, you have to, as a participant or invisible observer.
Well, I think you'd probably rather be an invisible observer rather than a participant, I would assume.
That's correct. If I could be an invisible observer, to answer this question would take months. There's so many visuals when I read from the participants, especially the grunts, the rank and file. This is for federal too, to some degree, but mostly for Rebs. the March with Laws Brigade on the way to Gettysburg, as an example.
Right.
To see what Lee's army was in 62 at Second Manassas, to see what they were like in 61 at their Centerville encampments after, they were there up until March of 62. There's photo documentation of their huts, but to see that hut city of 40,000 troops.
Wow.
Log hut city of 40,000 troops. What did that look like? Or, to see Atlanta, the photos exist, but to be able to go into Atlanta where the railroad yard is, to be there, to see Shiloh, to see Johnston's army on April 5th, before the battle, deployed out in the woods, to see what they looked like, to see what they were wearing, to see John Pelham's Horse Artillery Battalion in action, to see Jeb Stuart's cavalry reviews, he had two of them, at Brandy Station, to be on Lee's march, the retreat, to be on that, to see that, the end, the swan song.
Right.
To juxtapose that end with all the high hopes, all the close moments, the gotaways.
Yeah, the could have been. Yeah.
The could have beens, the amazing effort for a nation, the amazing effort, and to see so many people, including the women, to give so much in the hardships, and then to see the ripple effect of the aftermath.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about this country is the reconciliation. Yeah. When you think about really the hardships in the South's backyard repeatedly, all that hardship, it's amazing that there isn't more bitterness.
Yeah. And I think that's what the left is trying to manufacture.
I think they are. And again, this is somebody that historically has been on the left. And I'm like, that's what it feels like to me. And I think I mentioned this to you before. I really wonder if a lot of the left is truly liberal. Honestly liberal. And I mean liberal in a positive way.
Right.
Libertarian, liberate. Are they truly liberal?
No.
And I wonder about that. And I really don't think that's so much the case anymore.
No.
I think like a traditional Democrat is an endangered species. I worry about a real liberal being an endangered species in the sense of the way it's used now. I think it's been hijacked, and it's worrisome to me as to where this goes. We don't have a crystal ball. Where does this go? Right now with the current administration, I think a lot of people that are worried about the monuments are catching a breather. And it would be a mistake to raise a champagne glass and have a toast, because there's so many problems. There's so many efforts to destroy so much great artwork that I really think has been harmless. And this whole Jim Crow argument is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think it's ridiculous. Maybe if somebody gave me some information, they'd change my mind, but I haven't seen any info.
Well, when most of these monuments were put up, Jim Crow was not being threatened in any way, shape, or form. So it's not like they were putting these monuments up to, say, hey, here's our Jim Crow monument. No, there was no threat. And,
right.
And that's the other thing, too, is the hypocrisy of the North. And we don't have time to go into that. But, you didn't have black migration in any great number in the North until like the 1920s. So I don't want to hear about all of this, the South invented racism. It's just garbage.
Well, you bring up an interesting point because it'd be a great master's thesis to look at black migration out of the South at what times it was happening, because you bring up a good point. There are multiple waves of Southern immigration to the North. My dad was one of them when he left home in 1938. He was 16 and he left home to get money.
Yeah.
He went north to get work. And so, there's various waves of Southern immigration, and I think that there's a parallel between white and black moving north for economic, reasons.
Yep.
So, I'm not saying there aren't racial reasons for blacks to move, but I think that economic reasons would be one of the reasons. I assume. So,
one Civil War myth you'd love to erase forever.
Yeah.
I know there's not just one, but if you could just pick one.
I would say that that Gettysburg's the true high tide of the Civil War.
Really?
The high tide of the Civil War. I don't think it's the high tide at all. It would be, and I learned this from Ed Barst when I worked on the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission in 1992. It was the summer and fall of 1862. And the reasons for this would be, well, one of the reasons would be, to make this argument would be, there's probably, on various levels, about 7 or 8 Confederate offensives going on in that time period. There's no other time period in the war where there's that many going on. Of course, you got Lee moving towards 2nd Manassas, then into Maryland. That would be the biggest well-known one. But then you have Bragg, that would be the second most well-known, moving up into Kentucky with 35,000, which will culminate at Perryville. But you also have Kirby Smith in eastern Kentucky, or from Knoxville moving into eastern Kentucky, then on to Lexington with 10,000 troops. And he'll detach one of his divisions led by Harry Heath to go to Cincinnati, and he'll be sitting outside Cincinnati for a couple days.
Wow.
With 6,000 troops. And there's Confederates buried at the airport at Cincinnati from that occupation, from that area.
I did not know that. I did not know that. That's interesting.
But there's a lot more. There's a lot more offensives there. It's a 1,000-mile front of Confederate movement. So that's the true high tide.
Wow.
Is summer and fall of '62, and they're trying to affect European recognition and the congressional elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thank you for being with us. Love to have you back.
All right.
I'll give you the last word.
Yes, I just want to talk a little bit about battlefield preservation real quick. I mentioned before I'm a member of the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. More specifically, it's Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, the Wilderness, and Chancellorsville. 4 big battles, all in the top 10 list of costless battles of the war. They're within 15 miles of each other, and a lot of the land where these battles took place will be or is up for sale or has been developed. And so the group that I'm involved with has saved 2,000 acres so far, hopefully a lot more. I'm going up there in a month or so to look at some land at Spotsylvania, so hopefully more property. But the CVBT, the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust, is saving a lot of land there and just getting involved in battlefield preservation in general. So the green space thing, I wanted to talk about that because that's historically my foundation. Thank you. But now added to it, pardon me, the monument thing. Defend Arlington and what they stand for. And again, the precedent.
Yeah.
It's not just about the monument.
Right.
It's about the precedent, and removing that monument stands for. If that monument's removed, kiss all of them good night all across the cemeteries of the South. If a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I don't understand what monuments have to do with Southern poverty, but the Southern Poverty Law Center or groups of that ilk, they want to remove that artwork. It's repugnant, and this needs to be stopped. It's just simply wrong. And we can moan about it and complain about it, and a lot of people will, but you gotta make some effort. You're not facing double canister charging a Yankee battery. You can pick up a pen, you can type a letter. You can do that. Yeah. The people we're trying to defend did a whole lot more than we did.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you for your efforts on that. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for being on the show. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Speaking of support, thanks again to Jonathan Mary Lee's donation to make July's programming possible. We really appreciate it. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please subscribe and share us with your friends. Check out our radio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and X. Look for Dave's Raves, which are 2-minute audio commentaries on current events. I've got to slide down here just a little minute. Okay, so our guest this coming Thursday is Kathy Henners, here to discuss the possibility of a Mandami-type mayor for Nashville and the danger of that. Islamists in Tennessee are very well organized, and that is a threat. That is definitely a problem. Join us to be informed of this danger. Next Monday, our guest will be Kent Morrell, who is challenging Robert Briggs for Senate in 2026 in Tennessee Senate District 7. Briggs certainly qualifies as a reptile in my book. If you're in his district, you don't want to miss this. If you are a constitutionally minded conservative anywhere in Tennessee, you need to hear this. Hope you'll join us again next time. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.